Okay, then. Hello there, everybody, and welcome. The third host of Impulsive Never Survives, really. I didn't know that. Also, they said George left, and I didn't know that either. Bro, I just skipped an ad, bro. What is this? How am I going to skip an ad for you to put me in another ad as soon as I start
In April
recording? What is
2023,
this?
George Janko unfollowed both Logan Paul and Mike Malak on Instagram. George had been suspiciously absent from Impulsive for weeks, having last appeared on the episode with Ryan Garcia on March 28th. This raised questions about whether he'd left Impulsive, especially because Logan and Mike didn't explain why he wasn't there. Nothing had been confirmed, but on an episode of Jeff FM released on April 21st, Tana Mojo let slip that George had in fact left Impulsive.
All right, we're back.
We are the new Impulsive. I'm sorry.
We are. It's fun.
Y'all are having like a rebrand, like George is leaving. Like, this is it. This trio's really it.
Yeah.
Shortly after this, the profile picture and banner of the Impulsive channel was changed to just
Also, they said, like, I watched another thing about this where they said that it was weird for him to be on the, like, it would be, let's say it would be Logan and then Mike, and then it would be their guest, and then George would be over here, which would make no sense because then the guest is looking this way. And it should have been like George would have been over here with Logan and Mike, and then the guest would have been over here. Something like that. So then it makes sense, right?
just Logan and Mike, pretty much confirming that George had left the podcast. To many, this probably came as a surprise, but when you take a step back, George leaving actually makes a lot of sense. In a previous video of mine, I covered George's relationship with Logan and Mike and the dynamic they had on the podcast. In brief,
it was his video that I watched.
Like a spare part, trying his best to come up with jokes to get involved in the conversation, but often falling flat on his face. Things turned sour at the end of last year when George walked out on the Bobby Lee podcast, and they got even worse when Logan attacked his religious beliefs in a Boys Only episode. A lot of fans were disgusted by Logan's behavior and rallied behind George, with some even encouraging him to leave Impulsive and start his own podcast. Funnily enough, just a month later in January 2023, that's exactly what he did. This video is sponsored by Babbel. With summer under, English won't be it how much of a alert or conflict their times and target. Now back to the video. Despite using a clickbait title, George opened the first episode of his podcast by dispelling rumors he was leaving Impulsive and explaining why he started the pod.
Obviously, I'm still on Impulsive, guys. For any of you guys that are like, oh, their beef situation and now he's starting his own like lane. I decided to do this less than 20 hours ago. I'm doing this just to share more of my point of view without corrupting the flow of Impulsive. You know, there's some thoughts that I want to share with, if it's from my beliefs or just my point of view that necessarily might be monologue-ish or might be something that a certain core audience of Impulsive might want to hear. This is the extended George Janko version.
If you follow the Impulsive podcast, you've almost certainly seen George go on a tangent with something deep or meaningful, and it's pretty clear it just doesn't fit. So his decision to make his own podcast made sense. So far, the podcast has been doing pretty well, with guests like Bryce Hall, Summer Rae, and Brendan Schaub appearing on it, as well as some popular guests who haven't even appeared on Impulsive. Judging from the comments, people seem to be enjoying it so far, and they're really impressed with the guests. Of course, George's podcast will never be as big as Impulsive, but I'm sure his initial success has shown him that he can do just fine on his own, and this likely played a role in his departure from Impulsive. The truth is that in the past, George has relied heavily on Logan and Mike to get views and stay popular. If you look at the content he used to post on his channel before starting his podcast, almost all the videos that got a high number of views had either Logan or Mike in them. Not to mention that without Impulsive, George wouldn't be half as well known as he is today. I can't imagine he felt secure with his success being dependent on his association with other people, so making this pivot was a sensible move. Besides, we've seen this story play out successfully many times before. A creator joins a popular group, gains a substantial following, puts out their own content, then eventually leaves the group so they no longer have to deal with the things they don't like. But the strange thing is, even after Logan attacked George's faith last year, George continued to profess that Logan is his best friend and that he'll stick with him.
And a lot of people in the comment section was like, Logan doesn't deserve George. George should leave and go do other podcasts. And I sat there and I really mean to say this from my heart, bro. Like, even though the whole world turned against you, that God is right near you. Neither him or me or Mike or any single person here will ever abandon a man like you, because you're not worth abandoning, and I love you.
This raises the question, what could have happened that was so bad that they're seemingly no longer friends? On April 25th, 2023, George tweeted saying, "I wasn't going to talk, but now I am." This led fans to believe they were going to get answers, but as of mid-May, neither George, Logan, or Mike have made an official statement. Some fans have speculated that this is because George owns equity in Impulsive, so there are legal proceedings taking place place which prohibit them from speaking about it. Although George has made it clear that things didn't end amicably by throwing shade at Impulsive on his podcast.
We talk, we hang out, but it's never been like a one-on-one.
Yeah.
Or I'm sorry, not one-on-one.
Yeah, that's
Right.
cool. I know what you mean.
I
We're
just
like
treated
one.
you like myself on Impulsive.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
He also hearted comments speaking ill of Logan and posted an Instagram story containing comments favoring his new podcast over Impulsive. This probably isn't the best way to go about things, but it seems like George's pent-up frustrations are seeping through. On May 10th, Jeff Wittek appeared on Impulsive not as a guest, but as the third host on a Boys Only episode. The reception to the podcast was great, with countless comments praising Jeff and calling for him to take George's place as the third host. But while that may sound like a good idea, I'd argue that it's really not. Sure, Jeff host, but while countless comments praising Jeff and calling for him to take George's place as the third host. But while that may sound like a good idea, I'd argue that it's really not. Sure, Jeff getting involved for a Boys Only episode was seamless, but as soon as you get a guest involved, the dynamic completely changes. It doesn't make for good viewing to have 3 podcast hosts fighting for time on the mic, so naturally the designated third host must take a back seat. This wouldn't suit Jeff's personality, especially given he's used to being in the driver's seat for his own podcast. And honestly, the role of the third host didn't suit George either. George rarely came to podcasts having researched the guests. He often brought up topics which neither the guest nor Logan and Mike had any interest in talking about, and he was regularly distracted or even daydreaming while filming. Now, none of this is excusable, and George should have strived to do a better job, but it was a symptom of something larger.
I was like 1 foot in, 1 foot out of who I am. I feel like in any career path you take, you are doing it to get your foot in the door, and then at what point do you stand up and start being who you are?
George didn't feel fulfilled and Impulsive, molding himself around the things Logan and Mike wanted to speak about, so he simply didn't put 100% into the podcast. This becomes clear when you take a look at George on his own podcast, where the difference is night and day. He's lively, better researched, and completely engaged, and it's because now he has the freedom to say and do what he truly wants. On his podcast, he's joked about having a good seat now and how nice it is to be able to see and hear the guest. He's joked about how nice it is to not have to worry about the length of a story he might share or get.
See, that's what I meant. Like last time, I think it was the same YouTuber who said the layout of the whole thing was weird because it was like 2 and then 2 with the guests looking at the other 2 instead of it being 3 and 1.
Then cut off while speaking, and perhaps most important of all for him, how nice it is to be able to freely talk about God. To newer Impulsive fans, this situation might seem like a first, but Logan and Mike have had this exact problem before, having a co-host who just isn't quite compatible with them. Just like Logan got into a big argument with George about religion before he eventually left the podcast, Mike got into a big argument with Mac, the previous third host, before he ended up leaving the podcast. Like the situation with George, it came down to Mac wanted to speak about things that were interesting and meaningful to him, but not interesting to Logan and Mike. In a live stream episode of Impulsive, Mac began talking about his passion for painting, and the reception he got was brutal.
You generally miss the cultural point of talking about stuff that people want to hear about. I'm sorry. I'm just saying, generally, we have conversation about things that are ongoing in the space that have interest points to the listener. If you miss the mark, you may be overshadowed by the people who aren't. Like, I don't know how else to say it, dude.
It's almost as if Mike could be saying the exact same things to George.
This podcast plays on our interests, which tend to be sort of on the cultural button. I think what Mike's saying is that sometimes we get to a point where we try to maybe talk about stuff that we think would appeal to more people.
Absolutely.
And your stuff is a little bit more niche.
After this, Mac left Impulsive, realizing it just wasn't the right place for him, and now we're in a similar situation with George. With the third spot on the podcast free again, Logan and Mike have a decision to make: look for another host or continue on with just the 2 of them. And I believe this time they should go on as a duo. Mike's interviewing skills are way better than they used to be, so between the 2 of them, they'll do just fine on guest episodes. And for Boys Only episodes, they could have a revolving door of recurring guests like Jeff Wittek and Jake Paul who could stand in. This way they can keep things drama-free without changing the whole feel of the podcast. Overall, I think George leaving is what was best for both sides. Impulsive doesn't seem to be taking a hit from his departure, and it's clear George's podcast is off to a good start. However, it's a shame this seems to have come at the cost of George's friendship with Logan and Mike. Hopefully, when the dust settles and time passes, they'll be able to work things out.
hopefully everything turns out good for him though. Still shocks me how Logan has been exposed as a scammer and all around terrible person, but people still watch. Thing he does just doesn't give me any hope. He did say he was gonna fix that up, huh? When CoffeeZilla called him out on it and stuff. Basically, he's obnoxious out of Logan and Mike, personality wise. He just knows some cringe shit is gonna be said. Motherfucking wannabe comedian starts a bit every episode where it's so out of place. He needs to learn to just chill and stop practicing stand up sets on a podcast. I don't know. I don't really care either. Hey, it's up to your guys' opinion. Let me know what you guys think. But yeah, like, subscribe. See you guys later. Hope you have a good day or night, and bye.